Funding for this program was provided in part by the RE Synergy Foundation. Content for the Sustainable World.
My dad was an old-school surgeon who always wished he was a rancher, and a man who took life by the horns and ran with it. Think John Wayne meets Ernest Hemingway meets Teddy Roosevelt. One thing that always embarrassed me, though, was that if my dad saw something interesting wherever he was, he'd go ask about it. He'd start up impromptu conversations with perfect strangers about crop rotation, cattle genetics, or how to get all those pieces of firewood in the load to stay on top of that one little donkey. I was mortified as a kid. Well, I grew up, and now that's me. I married a perfect man with itchy feet who loves all things music and film and who makes documentaries just for the love of it. If you dump all of those things into a petri dish and let them stew for 25 years of blissful chaos, what do you get? Well, welcome to my life of vicarious agriculture. Come on along for the ride.
Hi, I'm Geordie Soutar, the founder of DunLouise Angus, here in the middle of the county of Angus in Scotland.
And I'm Louise Soutar, I'm his daughter. Geordie and Julia founded DunLouise back in 1995, and DunLouise is named after me and my older brother Duncan. So we raise native Angus cattle here at Kingston Farm in the county of Angus, where Angus originates from.
We started this, as Louise says, 30 years ago, and essentially everything on this farm is 100% native origin Angus. There are no imported bloodlines in any of the cattle here, and this is the only place anywhere on any continent that has the 10 original cow families that are left in existence. There were nearly 100 in the 60s. There are now only 10, and this is the only place that all of these 10 cow families exist. And we're pretty proud of that, and you know, we just keep trying to make them better as time goes on. We think they're good to start with, but we keep trying to improve them.
Now you use that word native, but that's actually would it be a patented term here? Is that what you call it?
It's a trademark name, which means to call them native, they must be 100%. The pedigrees must go back to the very start of the breed, or the start of the herd books in the mid-1800s. There can be no infusions of cattle from any other part of the world. That is the registered trademark for native Angus cattle.
And I believe the Rare Breed Survival Trust is behind you on this one. Is that right?
Well, they recognise what we've done, and we in the initial days they had a bank of old semen, and we had access to that. As time has gone on, we've bred bulls ourselves, and most of what we use nowadays is our own breeding. We do bring in other lines. We can access semen back to the 1960s, and that's essentially the genetic foundation of the stock.
Well, was Britain the same as it was in the United States, where that was just this fundamental change in how cattle breeding was done when artificial insemination came in, or was it different here? Because it very definitely was something where all of a sudden you would have a large number of cattle that you could change fundamentally from just a couple of bulls.
They changed the model mainly because there were, at the time, huge surpluses of grain. So the thing to do was make the model that could eat more cereals, whereas these cattle, our cattle do not get cereals. It was done for the best of reasons in the States, because they had vast quantities, and there were not the outlets in the 50s and 60s for grain that there is nowadays. So they altered the model of the cattle so that they would consume grain. And also here, these are very natural. There's no hormone implants at all, and no corn in any shape or form. It's purely grass we use on these cattle. you'll see them for yourself.
We started talking a little bit about how we were changing the cow to meet the needs of the surplus grains. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, my understanding is that there were vast surpluses of grain, and the way to utilise it was to feed it through cattle. Because at that time there wasn't biomass systems and the various outlets that there are now. So they altered because these are not great cereal consuming cattle. They don't work on high intakes of cereal.
Now, when you say these, you're saying these Angus, and
These
that is
Native Angus.
Native Angus, and that is very different from maybe some of the Angus that we have in the States. Tell me about that.
Correct. Well, they are different because these cattle are designed to eat grass and get fat on grass, produce really high quality beef off grass. And it's not all cattle can do that. A lot of them now must have the cereals. People argue the merits of cereal-fed beef and all these sort of things, and that's fair enough. But I think it's been proven that the grass-finished cattle, from a health aspect,
Much better, yeah. When you're looking at your balance of like omega-3s and omega-6s, when we've all got to watch for heart disease and things like that now, your conjugated linoleic acids and things like that are good for joints. Well, yeah, nothing better than a grass-fed steak, but the difference between grass and grain-fed in that instance is huge. It's not just it's beef, and it's not all the same product, is it?
No, it's not, and even within the breed. So you're telling me that a native Angus is going to have different. It's almost a different breed than an Angus that you might find somewhere else. Correct?
to a degree that's true. A lot of their characteristics are the same. They're all mostly black-hided, but yes, these cattle react differently to pasture. A lot of our export markets is to countries that do not want or cannot feed lots of corn, and they find these deep-bodied cattle do better on second-rate forage. Very recently, we've had two different outlets, one in Australia and one in Uruguay, telling us exactly the same story. Both countries have experienced fair droughts, and the cattle that come out the other end, having survived better, they then put on condition better. The natives do far better than anything else. And now they say, oh, sustainability is a big word. So is survivability, because if they die, they're no good to you.
Yeah, see, that's the thing that I find very interesting. In the we're a short-term, long-term species, the human species are. And oftentimes we are looking at the short run because our whole economy is based on it, right? Grow, 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 produce, produce, produce. He who produces the most at the moment is the one that will succeed financially. And yet the world is very quickly changing. We're getting, I had a hurricane watch come out in San Diego just this month. Wow. Hurricane in San Diego. Yeah. It's amazing. With the drought in certain places in the country, you're not going to get the availability of, or the ability to grow corn to feed a cow. You really want the cow just to eat the grass and be done with it in some circumstances.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or be able to survive, if you're a longhorn, survive 115-degree heat. Mm-hmm. And so these things that have adapted over hundreds or thousands of years have a value to us.
Oh, yes.
And yet they're lost in the production system.
Yeah.
So these cattle behind us, they are very different looking Angus than what I might see in the States.
Yeah.
Now, if you could just describe a little bit about physically the difference I'll stand here for
Stand
you.
closer to
Yeah,
you.
physically the difference between what you might see in a typical American style Angus or even British, non-native British Angus and this.
Yeah. So what we're looking for is a great body depth, that you don't eat the leg of a cow, but all to do with like the body depth, because you're looking for a big rumen capacity, because that's basically her powerhouse. She needs to have a big powerhouse to power her body. Whereas if you've got a wee narrow body, how on earth can she convert forage correctly to putting on beef, to putting on fat, to caring for her calf? So that's probably the first thing that you'll see, is that our cows are, they're 3/4 body mass when you look at them from the side, and only a little bit of leg underneath. They'll also be slightly shorter in stature from your average American cow, but again, that's based on natural selection over time. That, we could breed a 1,000-kilo cow, but she wouldn't be able to be as efficient as a 650-kilo cow. So by and large, people come and say, oh, they're a bit smaller, but they're not the belt buckle cattle that you picture from the 60s, where they're like down here in a whole load of fluffed up straw. They're more functional than that. Next thing that you're really looking for is structure. So, she's got to be able to, not here, but everywhere else that we sell to, she's got to be able to walk miles for water, miles for food. We're 2 cows per acre here. Well, what if it's 1 cow per 40 acres? She needs to work hard for a living, so she doesn't have the leg structure, the feet structure underneath her for it. She's just no good, is she? And then the last thing, I guess, from a cow perspective that we're be pretty hot on is an udder, because again, she needs to feed that calf. That her sole job is to make a calf and then be able to feed it. Well, if she's got, a rubbish udder that is dragging along the ground, the calf can't suckle from it, she's more prone to mastitis. Again, you have to think about like farmers not valuing their own time, that the amount of time that you spend faffing with a cow with mastitis, faffing with a calf trying to get it drink because it's a terrible udder. Value your own time is what I always say with these things. And if you have a cow that you're spending way too much time on these things, then she's not a productive cow. I always feel like your best ones are the ones that you kind of forget are there, because they get in calf every year, and then they have a calf, and then, oh, there's just this nice calf, and oh, who's your mum? And it's just a cow you've really not had to bother with all year, because she's just gone and done what she was meant to do.
Well, that's one of those things that with the heritage breeds seem to be so phenomenal, because they value calving ease and they value mothering ability and all those things that make them less work in the long run. Are they potentially less productive in terms of the pounds that you get over time? I don't know that these Angus are like that, but many of the heritage breeds that we talk about, it's a calculation. The time that I have to spend to get that animal pregnant, or to make it deliver, or to take care of its baby because it won't itself, you have to weigh the value of that and say, sometimes the ones that take care of themselves, because that's the way they've done it for hundreds of years, there's a serious value there.
Yeah, I think it's something that people forget, is that, you go to South America, you go to Australia, you go to New Zealand, nothing but black cows. It's always Angus there. And they won't have been the only cattle that have been shipped out there. So they've survived for a reason, that they are what nature intended to do, and they're there to live and they're there to survive. And, humans over time, we've tried to change and adapt that and make that better as we are inclined to like to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have. And it is shifting for your market and your economy. I feel like farming in my time even has come under such strong scrutiny in a way that it maybe for a long time didn't. And actually, do we need to think about more how we present ourselves to the public? And actually, everybody wants to see a nice cow that's on a grassy paddock and is living a nice life. Well, why not, you can do all those things at once, that you've got a good marketable product because it's producing prime beef in like a very sustainable manner. Catherine's being super friendly today.
And you can see this is another issue, temperament. These animals are naturally very docile and very friendly. See, she's curious. She's not wild. She just wants to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And these are things that get diluted. If you add other things for the best of reasons, you will also get something you didn't bargain for.
Lots of unintentional consequences.
Yes,
exactly.
And sometimes those consequences might be good, right? We've been working with the American Milking Devon Cattle Association that came from your Red Devons over here, because it's their 400-year anniversary coming up. And in the 50s or 60s, they had this split that occurred where some were breeding for beef and some were selecting for the old traditional style. And here we are 50 years later, it's a completely different cow, a breed of cattle. And yet the genetics are almost exclusively the same, is my understanding. But that they actually split into two organizations, which was a smart thing to do. But the difference in the structure of that and the phenotype of that animal is marked, because they selected, even within a certain genetic range, they selected for certain characteristics.
Yeah.
And I look at these Angus here and I think that is, I would almost, if I saw that in a field in America, I'd almost say, what breed is that?
Yeah.
Because it's got the mass. It's just got shorter legs.
Yeah.
And
This is the blueprint of the breed.
Isn't that
That's
funny, though?
effectively what that is. It's the blueprint of the breed.
and yet it looks so different.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep,
yes.
Yep.
Oh,
Now,
yes.
you have red cattle here too.
Yeah.
Tell me a
Yes.
little bit about the red.
So they're a natural deviation in the Angus, so red and black are totally acceptable. In the UK, it's all under one society, so we don't have a red Angus association, a black Angus association. You'll just notice when you see tags that that's red Coral Beauty, so she has to have red at the start of her name. But it's something that we breed for because, again, different markets demanding different things. That cow can survive in 40-degree heat in Australia really easily. So South America and Australia, they're really, really keen on their reds.
They're genetically identical.
Oh yeah, you strip the hide off and it's just the same. But it's a survivability thing.
There's a red calf running about there. It has a black father who carried the red gene. And
She
we're
named
trying
after
to
my
make
sister-in-law.
more reds.
Now, boy, that is just absolutely a beautiful animal, but it is very different. And look how high that udder is, which is fantastic, and a very, so I don't want to say docile, because that's not the right word. It just is not a flighty animal at all.
No.
But it's
Hi.
something that you do, again, lots of unintentional consequences that you do have to breed for. And it's something that, I don't know how many limousines you have ever come across, but they've never bothered with temperament over time. And so they've got an animal that can put on beef like Billio, but it is a very bad-tempered animal. And they just seem to live with that consequence. But that's not how we want our Angus.
So talk for a minute about, you talked about other countries and surviving in 40-degree Celsius, which I'm trying to remember what the conversion is on that one.
Double it and add 30, like 110, 115
Yeah.
Fahrenheit.
And you're going to get that in Australia, where you do actually ship.
Yeah, so we can't ship live cattle anywhere outside of the UK anymore post-Brexit, but we haven't been able to since pre-foot and mouth and really BSE actually. So really since the early 90s we've not been able to ship to anywhere outside of Europe, but thankfully the advent of embryo transfer technology means that we can send, that an Australian farmer comes and looks at that cow and thinks, I want that, we can just flush her, and then there's a permit essentially made for her, and that you can put embryos out to basically wherever you can get a permit for. So we've actually, for the first time, we are sending shortly, hopefully, embryos to Costa Rica for the first time. There wasn't a license or an ability to send embryos to Costa Rica until now, but hopefully we've got a dozen embryos going to Costa Rica shortly. So
It's an amazing world, is it?
yeah, we love a follow-up trip as well. So a couple of years' time.
So now, for anybody that might not know the difference between the two, the embryo is the 100% fertilized, 100% native Angus that you have, if the people want those genetics.
And it's a week old when you harvest it.
Okay, so you implant that into any other cow, and you're going to have a 100% native Angus, as you see it on the ground here, as opposed to a semen sale and in implantation or not implantation, but insemination in a cow in wherever it happens to go. You're going to get progeny that's 50-50. Correct? It's 50% native Angus and 50, which might actually be good, because it's my understanding that you do that as well for people that are wanting a little bit of that native Angus back in their other Angus herd. Tell me about that.
Basically, a lot of people, obviously buying a straw semen is appreciably cheaper than buying an embryo. So a lot of people use that. They buy the semen, and if they want to take a bit of size out of their cows, they'll use the native semen. It does, in one generation, bring back a lot of the tributes. One generation, you'll get better heads deeper bodies. It's amazing what one shot of these cattle can do.
Okay, but does that, I know you get hybrid vigor in the first generation, oftentimes, but I know sometimes you lose that a little bit as you go. Does it hold pretty well? Because these are a similar genetic line and yet very different. How does that hold true?
Oh, that holds very true, because these cattle are not exactly tightly bred, but they're reasonably line bred. We would go back after the grandfathers maybe, and the same bulls will recur then in the pedigree as time goes on. So they're consistent. They'll breed consistent. That's part of the secret of Gypsy Earl, who was so successful. Gypsy Earl stamped them. You know, he pumped them out like himself. You got the square legs, you got the head. The odd one would get away from him, but most of them would look like Gypsy Earl.
Well, that's funny. That's how we got into a little bit of trouble in the States with the Holstein bunch, because there were two bulls that, boy, they just stamped out that characteristic of milk production. And so we said, in everything it goes, right? And yet, it seemed so funny to come to Scotland and say, we need to hit the Angus people, right? Aberdeen is if I'm not mistaken, Aberdeen Angus is the original start point.
Yes,
is it? That's the name.
We still call them Aberdeen Angus in this country. It's the only place that does.
Yeah, thereabouts.
The Australians just call them Angus, the Americans South
And then, of course,
America.
not to be confused with Aberdeens either, because there's Aberdeens, there's Angus, but we are Aberdeen Angus here.
Well, this is because they come from this area. Now we have these gorgeous hills in the background. Tell me a little bit more about the families and the history of this animal.
These are the glens of Angus. Now, of the cow families that existed in the 60s, 98 I think there are only 10 left. And as I say, 9 of them originated in the county of Angus, 1 in Banffshire. There were a few of the improvers in Aberdeenshire that took them on, and hence the Aberdeen Angus. But there's been black hornless cattle recorded on the east coast of Scotland, not just in Angus, further up the country as well. You'll see cattle in here that are Ns. They're the Nels of Aldbar. They're recognised as the oldest cow family in the breed. Aldbar Castle's about 10 miles from here, now demolished, but there's records of there being black hornless cattle there in the 1700s. But there would be black hornless cattle elsewhere, but they're the first recorded ones that ended up in the herd book.
Now, just like maybe I know that there's a couple of breeds of cattle, the Chillingham cattle and the White Park cattle. We didn't have fences for a long time in the States. And here, you have all the stacked stone walls, so there actually seemed to be an ability to contain herds a little bit more than there may have been in the States. Would that be a correct assumption?
That would always have been the case, I think. From time immemorial, people would have their own sort of...
Because you build a wall like that, and that'll last 150 years.
We saw them stacking those stone walls. That is a major skill, but it is built to last.
We were building one, yeah. I was building one with some friends.
Louise has done a course on it, so...
That's some work there.
Yeah, it is.
But what it means in terms of animal husbandry is that family that you talk about, those 10 families, correct? You can do some pretty specific characteristic breeding. You might have family A versus family B, and they are going to have very different cattle unless you got a really athletic bull, or unless they purposefully mix them together, you're going to control the characteristics that you want. Is that correct?
Oh, yes.
Very much so. And we could very much tell, what is a gypsy head and what is a cherry blossom set of ears. And we would say that each family has they all have shared attributes, but to us there's a defining characteristic of each family, which was clearly from time immemorial of other people breeding them, and we just try to perpetuate that, because again, horses for courses. A gypsy suits someone, a cherry blossom suits someone. So whilst we want them sort of line bred so that they stamp a type, we want there to be distinctions between them, because what suits South America doesn't suit Australia, doesn't suit the USA, and we've got to make sure that we've got a product that suits everybody in there.
Yeah, because in our production systems, we have a tendency to make it all the same, right?
Yeah.
We're just Angus, 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 or Holstein, 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 or Leghorn chicken is everywhere. That's kind of what, in many cases, and not that we don't need production, but that's been one of the problems, is that we stamp something where everything is the same.
Yeah.
But over the history of the Angus, when you had families that could choose and could select, you had some ability to really say, this is what I want. Do you see big differences in the families?
Well, as Louise said, you've got gypsy heads, you've got cherry blossom ears, because bear in mind at that time it was very localized. Cattle didn't travel the same way as they can now. So the cherry blossoms were by and large on a farm about 15 miles from here, the Peebles. So he concentrated on cherry blossoms. You know, they were the cattle he liked, he had, so he had them. Very, very localized. But then as time went on, they became fashionable in New York in the 50s. So the cherry blossoms went to America. We adhere to a very strict naming system, which America doesn't. If it's of the cherry blossom family, the calf must have the initials CB. You can call it anything you like, but it must be CB, be it male or female. The Erica family must be E. You must call it E, whereas in the States, call it anything they like.
Well, that, again, I'm going to go back to the Devons. If you look at a milking Devon in Connecticut and a milking Devon in Colorado, on the kind of right close to the plains, boy, those can be very, very different in terms of their acclimation to that specific location. And so it's not just apples and apples because it's an American milking Devon, right? There might be big differences. So was there a sense of pride as to people saying, this is my family cow, this is the Angus, and this is how I like it? And were there certain families where they would go because that was the family you wanted?
It was fashions. Ericas were very predominant for a multitude of reasons. They were very, very good cattle. People took them as far as the Paris show and things like that. Now, the logistics of taking an animal to Paris
in the 1800s.
Exactly.
How hard work. It's just,
So hard enough bringing that Jacobite guy over here, right? Let alone getting the cow back.
Well, exactly. So,
so a lot of herds would name them sort of, it's like the Nels of Aldbar Castle and things like that. So you would, as you would do, you would take pride in, it's like our herd names now, isn't it?
Yeah.
That, you take pride that something is DunLouise and you want to make something that you are proud of, essentially. So yeah, people would do, and then it almost becomes like a collector thing, that people want a cherry blossom, they want a gypsy, like they want one of everything kind of thing, because they've all got something different to contribute.
So do you, for this herd here, do you mix with the other genetics, or are the families have they all mixed now together, or are they still distinct?
we mix the genetics between native cow families, not with anything else. They must be 100% native. Then we would cross a cherry blossom with a gypsy or whatever. Because essentially the thing is to make very good uniform cattle.
Okay, so you've got this breed that says these characteristics, and yet you are marketing to Australia, to the United States, to Argentina, wherever you happen to want to market. How can you, is this animal really able to make the transition in that way? Does it have that kind of elasticity in its tolerances?
Yeah. Well, we're not the first people to ship Angus everywhere. They're already there. So
150 years ago.
So they must have survived. And again, it's these genetics that survived all that time. So we're not like inventing something new. We're just re-exploring the benefits essentially of where these Angus cattle came from. But yeah, you can put a native Angus. We've got a client that, in the Andes of Colombia, so they're amazed that we come from sea level because their cattle are at 3,500 meters. So
10,000 feet.
I was going to say, can't do the conversion into feet. So they're amazed that they can do the same thing at sea level, and Argentina, that they live on totally flat ground, or Australia that they live up near the mountains kind of thing, and everybody seems to be surprised that they can survive. But again, it's not like we invented this or we invented the native cattle. They were always there. It's just that we've forgotten all the benefits that were there in the first place. So we're just sort of reintroducing that to people to say, hey, you know, they survived up here for a reason. So rather than pumping a whole load of grain into them, do you want to go back to those genetics? I mean, you can shove it out on a pasture and she does her thing.
Yeah, and Scotland is a bit of a, Scotland's a bit of a, there's a little bit of variety in the weather. I mean, I'm looking at this gorgeous sunshine, and you're telling me this has been terribly rainy and cold, and I don't necessarily believe you all because this has been so gorgeous while we're here. But we were here in November, and it was cold and chilly, and the as we can see, the mountains are in the back. You know, this is a land where very quickly you can gain altitude. So I could see that you would need to have animals that can acclimate. Yeah. Within a very short period of time, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we'll show you the DunLouise tartan, but we made it in a very specific way because Angus is not a massive county in Scotland, but you go from like the North Sea, so it's sea level, all the way up to high mountains, and you've got some very fertile land in there, you've got some really terrible land in there. So it's the cow designed for like the all-purpose county because, you know, you've got great grass by the sea, but she's also got to survive on like heathery land up on the hills. So it's all within a small area. You've got the ultimate test.
Yeah, now tell me a little bit about that DunLouise tartan because I saw a little bit about it. You have the purple for the heather, but tell me when you created this and why.
So we actually created it the year before our sale in about 2016 because our surname is Soutar and there is no Soutar tartan. So rather than sort of try and steal from somebody else, we thought, you know what, let's make our own, which is something you absolutely can do. So there's a woolen mill in Forfar that, you know, you've just got to make sure that your specific layout of pattern, that it is unique so that you're not stepping on anybody else's toes. So there's about 10,000 registered tartans out there.
10,000,
yeah.
Wow.
So you need to have a very specific set design of coloration and space apart between coloration that makes yours unique. So yeah, we set upon on all the different things that make Angus great. So purple heather, green grass, blue North Sea, white snow, then purple berry, like a pink berry, because it's a big soft fruit growing region as well. So we just thought we'd introduce all the things that make Angus as a county, and then put it on our Angus that make beef great.
So Louise and her mother did it.
Yeah.
I mean, that they were the they did it between them, the two of them.
Yeah.
I love that idea. I think that's interesting because you have such a traditional thing here and yet the new, and that's where the tradition comes from, is because somebody came up with something new. And you're going back to this traditional thing with the cattle that you have here.
Yeah.
You know,
So
with the Native Angus.
Yeah, we sort of a traditional values around here, but with a more modern approach to it, because we couldn't do what we do without semen and embryo advent technology, that because we can't ship anymore. So we need to move with the modern era, and you know, farming is slow change on everything. So, but we need to sort of look to the future the whole time, not just what's ahead of us next year, but 5 years, 10 years, and so we need. You know, we all need to look a bit further in the future because you can't change that quickly with cattle, can you?
No, you cannot. You get into things start popping up. I'm sure if you jag too quickly to the left, sometimes you lose and sometimes you gain. But the things that you lose, you're really sorry you lost if that's the one direction you end up going.
This is the whole thing of the Native Angus. You know, it's like making a cake. Once you add the flour, example. It doesn't come out.
You can't get the sugar out if you put too much in.
No, and that's the same with these. You can say, oh well, I'll add this and I'll maybe do that. Yes, you can, but it's no longer a Native Angus.
No, it is not. And I would think that would be one of the really great things you have about the ability to store embryos and semen now, is that you can always, as long as you keep it and as long as you keep the lines a little bit on the ground, then you have something to go by. It's when you only depend on that thing in the tank and that's all you have. You know, a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, there's genetic manipulation now, and now we can kind of build things in a lab. But I always wonder, with as fast as things are mutating now in our viral environment, in our farm environment, in our land, you kind of almost need something that can stay on the ground and adapt to that And so then when the time comes and you need it, you also have it then too.
Nature's much smarter than any man alive, isn't it?
Isn't it though?
You know, these cattle have survived, like lots of things, survived for a long, long time. And we think that we can improve and then we think that we can change, but nature is smarter than us in terms of what it will and won't do and what it will and won't tolerate. And again, it's this law of unintentional consequences that, you know, you're genetically manipulating something in a lab. Well, what are you going to get that you didn't intend for?
Yeah. Yeah. I look at our current production model not as an evil, horrible thing, but as something that, you know, the reason for biodiversity in many cases is what if, right? It's not 100% of the time. It's that 1% where something happens that you need something different in the production system. So if I am a Holstein farmer and there's, you know, the genetic pool is pretty small because we selected, at some point you might need something outside of that to bring back in.
Yes.
And if I were an Angus farmer in the States, regardless of how phenomenally successful I was, at some point you might say to yourself, you know, the what if, maybe I do need a little bit of grass tolerance in my beef.
Yeah.
And so, and it's still an Angus, right?
Yeah.
But it's old school Angus that might have different tolerances.
Well, in that vein, when we sent Gypsy Earl to America in 2008, whatever, they couldn't produce them quick enough. They couldn't produce because of the demand in America. Now, this was a bull with no figures whatsoever. No figures, no EPDs, no nothing. They couldn't make them quick enough. And my answer is, if the numbers told them everything they needed to know, why were they buying into a bull that had no numbers?
I have no answer for you. No answer that I want to commit. Well, I look at this field and think, if I had to raise beef cattle, this is more of what I would want, because this is just so true to the fundamentals, and yet still it has a history that has meaning behind it, and it still produces, and it's got phenomenal characteristics.
It's the future.
I would say it's the past and the future, in my opinion, and that's just as an outsider. But and so you have the same everywhere. In the next generation here too.
There you
right?
go.
Fantastic. Well,
Good.
thank you so much.
No problem.